Hello everyone. If you recall, in August we started looking at the International Cat Care's cat-friendly principles. And just to remind everyone, here they are again. There are 7 principles, 3 of them are focused on cats and 4 on people. And the cat ones are respect cats, respect the diversity of the species and understand the individual cat, keep cats well, give equal consideration to the cat's physical health and mental well-being, do cats no harm, ensure cats are never worse off as a result of people or their activities. And then the 4 people-focused ones are be solution-driven, find evidence-based, pragmatic and sustainable solutions for cats, communicate for cats, communicate considerately and share knowledge generously, collaborate, work together locally, internationally, and with people from different backgrounds, always supporting and valuing each other. And finally, evolve for cats, be innovative and remain curious and keep learning. So in August, we had the pleasure of Dr. Anne Enright's company. She is a veterinarian from Australia who specialises in shelter medicine. We discussed the first principle with her of respect cats. And this month, it gives me great pleasure to welcome Nathalie Dowgray, who is our head of International Society of Feline Medicine. Welcome, Nat. Can you tell everyone a little bit about your background and your involvement with Unowned Cats?
Yeah, sure. So I've been a veterinarian for over 20 years now. And then in around 2010, I think it was, I moved out of normal general vet practice and went to work for one of the larger feline charities in the UK as their on-site clinic vet. So I sort of started my shelter medicine career there, really, working in a large rehoming centre, doing all the veterinary work associated with that. So we had usually over 1,000 cats coming through the door every year. And then from there, I moved up to the Royal Veterinary College and again worked on their shelter medicine program for a number of years, working between a couple of sites as well as the main hospital. And again, there it was feline-only shelters that I was working with, similar size ones. So one of them we would see over 1,000 cats a year. The other one was a little bit smaller. They both had sort of slightly different ways of doing things, but again, a lot of the general principles were very much applied there. So all in, I've probably done 5-6 years of feline shelter practice as such. And then I moved on from that and went up to Liverpool to do my PhD. But I was still very much focused in preventative health care and that sort of population medicine. So that sort of bigger picture side of things is sort of the area that I always find the most interesting, I think.
Brilliant. I agree with you. And I hope you don't mind Elsie joining us today. She's always very keen to speak to you. So
that's all right. Thomas is currently lying down out of view, but there's a good chance that a ginger tail will just appear in a few minutes.
Oh, well. As I said, Nat, we're going to look at iCatCare's cat-friendly principles. And you were, together with myself, one of the authors of these principles when we actually articulated what it was that actually underpinned our values, really, as an organisation. And this month, we're going to be looking at the second cat-focused principle, which is keep cats well, as you know, give equal consideration to the cat's physical health and mental well-being. And obviously for us, this seems obvious, but would you say it's standard practice in the veterinary sector?
Not necessarily, no. And it's an interesting one to sort of reflect on. And as a principle, that was, I think, one of our ones that we wrote quite easily and quickly because it was kind of fundamental to us as the charity especially about how we consider what is good cat welfare. And on the veterinary side of things, we're often, when we're taught about welfare, we're taught the term health and welfare. So we're almost taught that health is separate to welfare, but actually they're not. Good welfare, one of the fundamental principles of good welfare is physical health, but then there's also the emotional health and the cognitive health. So the things that we've sort of termed the mental well-being of the cat. And so definitely historically, as part of our veterinary teaching, we haven't necessarily been taught the sort of balance between those things. And again, our training is very, very heavily focused on the physical health. That's what we're trained in. That's essentially our jobs as veterinarians, is looking after the physical health of the animals in our care. And I think Probably it's really only been the last 4 to 5 years that I feel as a profession we are starting to sort of expand that out and to really starting to think about welfare as more of a holistic sort of concept, and really be making sure that we are starting to think about the mental well-being of the cat. And again, I think that's a really good example of us as a charity, how we were kind of ahead of that curve, as it were. Something like our Cat Friendly Clinic program, which had its 10-year anniversary last year, was really the start of us as a charity working with the veterinary profession to try and institute thinking about the mental wellbeing experience of the cat coming into the vet clinic as part of your sort of day-to-day work with cats. So we're getting there, but it's a slow process, I think.
Well, as the principals say, we are all evolving. We're all sort of trying to get better and better. And it's interesting you talked about Cat Friendly Clinic, because as you know, I'm involved with Cat Friendly Homing, which is trying to bring those principles into the homing of unowned pet cats. So from your perspective, what do you feel the relevance of that particular principle, Keep Cats Well, would be for people working with unowned cats?
There's definitely a few aspects to it, and it's that equal consideration to physical health and mental well-being. And equal consideration means making sure that we're thinking about both. Some situations, one, at least in the short term, might temporarily trump the other one. And so in the unowned cat sector, it really is thinking about the individual situation, the environment that you're working with that cat in, be it outdoors, if it's a free roaming cat, be it in a shelter situation, that homing situation. And it's making sure you're thinking about, okay, what are the things that might need to occur to improve or benefit that cat's physical health, but also how are we going to do it in a way that isn't causing undue mental distress. And as lovely as we make our shelters, it is a strange environment. It's an environment that is probably very different from where most of these cats have spent a large part of their life. There's a lot of other cats in that environment, which has impacts on their mental well-being, but also on their physical health. So their risk of things like infectious diseases starts to go up. And the symbol that we have for this principle is the little balancing scales. And I really do think that's a big part of what we have to do as vets. We have to be thinking, okay, when they come in, what are the physical health things I need to be considering? I need to probably be vaccinating, possibly some parasite treatment might need to go into them. They're possibly going to need to be neutered. A lot of them come in unneutered, so need to be neutered. And it's all of those things, but also making sure we're doing them in a timely manner, but not necessarily too quickly, but also not necessarily too slowly, because we want to be keeping them in that abnormal environment as short a time as possible. So maybe for an unowned street cat, that is 24, 48 hours for neutering and just a good physical health assessment, and maybe more of a rehoming situation. If there are some procedural things that need to be done, can we do that within the first week or two to hopefully have them ready to home within a couple of weeks, rather than having to sit and wait for, say, a dental procedure for 2 or 3 months before they can be home. So it is definitely a balancing act.
It is. And as you were talking, I was seeing those scales and how sometimes, as you say, they do tip occasionally one way or the other, but you have to keep getting them back online because there may be some of those temporary priorities. But at the end of the day, you've got to keep sort of looking at both of them together. Yeah. And I was wondering, Nat, what you feel about people incorporating this into their work with unowned cats. I personally feel that there may be some need for extra training, because to identify a cat whose mental well-being is suffering is as complicated and difficult as understanding and assessing whether a cat is in pain or not, sort of thing, because they hide these things so well. How do you feel about that? Do you think as a whole the sector needs more training on that?
Definitely. And it's on the veterinary side of things, it's an area that we do need far more training in. And then if you work in that environment where you're seeing a spectrum of cats as well, when you come from, normal first opinion veterinary practice, your client base is 99% pet cats. And these are cats that, yes, the individual may not be super impressed by being at the vet clinic and meeting you, but they come from an environment that they're very comfortable being in close physical proximity to cats. Whereas in a shelter situation, again, varies significantly from shelter to shelter, but you're often dealing with a population of cats that may not be very comfortable at all with close physical proclamation. And some of these cats, their defense is to freeze. And if you're not recognizing that that is not a good thing, these cats are often very easy then to handle from a veterinary perspective, maybe the first time you meet them, but they're often the ones where the next time someone, be it a staff member in the cattery or be it a member of the vet team, has to do something physical to them, say give them a tablet because they needed a course of antibiotics, so they're getting a tablet twice a day, they've learned that freezing response doesn't work. And these are the ones that then are more likely to probably show some behaviours that may result in injury to themselves, but also to the staff members as well. And so having that wider understanding of body language and recognising when it's safe to proceed, safe for both the cat and for you, is something that's really complex. But it is an area that definitely is required, I think, for everyone. And there's that health and safety element, which from a practical side of things is often the way you can get some of this sort of training instituted in both vet clinics, but also in charitable situations. But the return for that means that actually it's beneficial to these cats. You're not putting them in a situation where they feel their only available response is to strike out, is to hiss, is to bite, and the stress and the mental distress that they may get from that is not something they're going to recover from quickly. So that sign of training is so valuable, I think, and it's not the kind of thing that you could just do a 1 hour webinar on and you're off and running. It's a lot of it is stuff that you need to be building over time with experience, but also with that learning and that underlying knowledge of why you're doing what you've been told to do as well.
No, I completely agree. And actually what you've mentioned is a really key message for this discussion today. When to stop, or when a cat is distressed, doesn't start when they start endangering themselves and others. It actually starts long before then. And I think it's not being recognized because people think, oh, this is great, the cat's not doing anything, I can do what I need to do. Yeah. But I think we have to sort of backtrack that and say, as you say, that is the road to somebody getting injured at the end of the day. But when you get that freeze response, or you get those cats that just seem to do nothing but sleep in their pens when they're, just confined, it's understanding that is as serious for the cat's mental well-being as a cat that starts aggressing because they feel they've got no other choice. So I think that's a really key piece of learning for this. You will find out that actually some of the most distressed cats are those ones that aren't doing anything, so they might be easy to treat, but actually it's not a good thing for them.
Yeah, and it is complicated because from a veterinary side of things, the kind of treatment protocols and things that may be relatively easy for you to put in place and to do with a cat that's in a home environment with a caregiver that really knows that cat and knows how to work with them aren't always going to be the easiest, because often, these cats are strangers to the people that are looking after them. It takes a long period of time before you learn, and from the cat's perspective, we don't want them in there long enough that you actually get to know them that well, ideally. And so there's sometimes little things, and it is hard because, again, it's this balancing act. When these new cats come into care, and ideally you want to have them assessed reasonably rapidly by the vet, create a plan of what needs to happen before they're considered okay to go out for homing. And you want all that to happen in a timely manner to keep their stay in care as short as possible. But the flip side of that is sometimes actually you have to take a step back. You have to go, they're eating, they're drinking. We just need to leave them alone for a week or two. They're fine. And then we can start to do some further assessment, but we can't necessarily do that straight away. I think, learnt that drugs become your friend with some of these cases as well, that actually sometimes rather than trying to do some of these things, you're better to say, let's not do anything further this week. We're going to have them over to the clinic next week. They're not going to have had any breakfast. We're going to sedate them. If we then need to do further, so we discover that they haven't been spayed and we need to spay them, we can give them some extra drugs, convert that to an anaesthetic, move that one forward. But we can then do everything that we need to do while they're nice and sleepy as such. And then you're trying to get things moving on in a timely manner, but also not have as much. Well, there'll still be some detrimental impact to the cat. Obviously, they're still coming to the vet clinic for a procedure, but hopefully you're getting everything done in one window while they're not conscious. So there's sort of those sort of things you start to perhaps think a little bit more differently about. And I haven't worked in shelter practice since, again, some additional sort of anxiolytic sedative drugs have become more readily available. But I think, again, they're probably helping a lot of those sort of situations as well. There's part of me that sort of doesn't want to have to sedate every cat that gets examined. But I think for some specific cases, those are going to be really useful.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And one thing that came to mind as you were talking then was the experience of what happened during the pandemic when we had lockdown, where all the people like vets, for example, and people who worked in shelters and homing centres had to keep working because they had animals to look after. But one of the protocols was when cats come in, you don't touch them for 48, 72 hours. And the impact on the cat's well-being, how they relax really, really quickly and everything. And it was interesting that the kind of thing we are recommending, prior to the pandemic, which is just back off for a bit. Don't, if you can get away with it, don't do everything all at once, actually became a necessity during the pandemic. And people found that actually that worked quite well. But again, your point is you can't have that as a blanket policy. You've got to discuss each individual cat, because there'll be some occasions where it's actually we need to do something quickly. So we need to think about how to do that with the minimum of impact on their mental well-being. Yeah, so there's those scales again. We're both doing it. There's that balance.
And I think that's always the really hard thing, isn't it? With anything, you can create some general rule protocols, but ultimately you have to be aware that they are just the general rules, and every individual basis has to be taken into consideration. And it's often... it's always slightly the funny things you don't always expect. I think when I first started in shelter practice, I sort of assumed I'd see a lot of stress-related cystitis, but we saw very little of that because, again, the facilities that we had the cats in meant that they were individual. They had at least 2 options for where they could go to the toilet, 2 options for where they could have a drink. If they'd come from a house where there'd been conflict with another cat, they suddenly had all the space to themselves. So we saw very little of that. But then the flip side, we would see cats that were used to toileting outside all of the time, suddenly in an environment where they had to use a litter tray. And so one of the things that I probably got called over for a little bit more commonly was just to squeeze some bladders and make sure that things weren't blocked, that actually they were just holding on. And then you'd have to try various different types of litter, and potting mix, I think, was always the final option because it was really messy, but sometimes you just had to give them some dirt and then they were happy. But
it's interesting, isn't it? Because if you think about the diversity that exists all over the world and how there are so many places that because of resources, they just can't give the cats those individual pens with the lovely setup that a lot of us have in the UK. So there's so many different challenges that people face. And I guess the application of these principles is going to vary according to, and let's be pragmatic about this, the very best you can do under the circumstances.
Yeah, that's it.
Nat, if you had to just finally think of one thing that you would change or implement for Unowned Cats to help people to apply this particular principle, what would that one thing be?
I think from the veterinary side of things, one of the things that I would say is always be striving for, is this cat well enough to go to a new home? Because often what happens, and again, I think it's part of our training, is we're trying to get the cats in the best health possible. And especially, and this again comes back to probably why I ended up going into a research field around older cats, is often sometimes good enough is good enough for rehoming. Especially with our older cats, we often have multiple things going on with them. We have multiple morbidities. And a lot of it is just getting them to the stage where you've done the practicalities that you can do and then trying to get them out into a home as fast as possible, I think is a big part of it. To me, I think there is definitely more on the veterinary side that we can do to be working within the Unowned Cat sector to really try and keep their length of time in care as short as possible, that we're not one of the clogs that's sort of holding up that ability for them to move forward into a newer home.
I'm really with you there, Nat. And I think we could almost end on that, saying that what we're aspiring to is actually good enough care is a very good way to get that balance right.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a complex job to do, but I think that's a really good message to end on. Thank you so much, Nat, for joining me today and for talking about keeping cats well, the second cat-friendly principle. Thanks a lot, Nat.